Welcome to the Insurance Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Reid Holsworth. Joining me today is Pat Caldwell.
That's me.
Welcome, Pat. Welcome to the show. Really happy that you're here, and great to see you again, man. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. So you are the Chief People Officer at Send. Which we're going to get deep into chief people officer type stuff and some leadership topics today, because you have definitely been around the block on some of this. So I'm really excited about this episode. It's going to be fun. But before we get into all of that, the listeners love to learn about the guest. So tell us a little about yourself, Pat. Where'd you grow up? What were you into when you're young? Kind of give us the background.
Yeah, for sure. So I call Austin, Texas home now, but the twang in my voice is not from here. It's from the southeast of Australia. So born in Melbourne, grew up in the south of Sydney, in a little place called the Sutherland Shire. They often say people don't leave the Shire. They're born and die there. I managed to somehow get out and find myself on the other side of the world, and had a really fortunate, lucky childhood. I was the typical kind of, if I can say it, the nerd in school. I took school incredibly seriously. If my friends were out, socializing, I was practicing my equations on a whiteboard. That kind of seriously.
That's awesome.
And grew up in Sydney, and my life at the time was. My wake hours were at least spread between schoolwork and tennis, which was my childhood love.
Oh, you love tennis. So tennis. Did you play tennis all the way through high school?
All the way through high school. So I started playing because I started playing soccer for a little bit, and then I was playing softball for a little bit, and I realized I was terrible at both. And my brother was playing tennis, and I started, hitting the ball with him, and realized that my hand-eye coordination is a bit better than my, how I use my feet. And started to pick up tennis from probably age 7 or 8, and played through fairly competitively, even with state and national tournaments, right up until the end of high school. Became a part-time coach, was coaching throughout some of my kind of late high school, early college days, and still pick up a racket every now and then, but it's gone from 5 to 6 days a week to the odd recreational game. But one day I will hit the gym, and I will get the racket restrung, and I'll take it more seriously and see if I've still got some.
That's awesome, man. What was family life like? What did your parents do for a living? What did that look like?
Yeah, I had a really great upbringing. I was super fortunate in this front. So my dad in finance, my mum in banking. We moved around a little bit with my dad's work. He kind of came through mining, utilities, construction companies for a little while, but all on the finance side. And had 2 brothers, grew up with 2 older brothers. I was the baby of the family. I tell my parents they kept having kids till they got the one they wanted. You can imagine how that goes down. But they were I think 4 and 6 years older than me. So both of them were heavy into sports, tennis and basketball for one, and soccer for the other. And spent all of my schooling years were within Sydney. I kind of moved out of Sydney after school, but we spent the better part of 12 or 13 years throughout Sydney before kind of venturing a bit further north in Australia.
Awesome. Any difficult situations you'd be okay sharing as a kid?
Ooh, deep. We go deep. Childhood, any childhood traumas I went through. So nothing specific as a difficult situation, but I guess the overarching one for my childhood is that, it wasn't until I was in my early to mid 20s before I shared with my parents that I'm gay. And
wow.
So throughout my childhood, it was the usual thing that lots of LGBT kids go through, which is that find your acceptance of self, and mine took quite some time. And super awesome family, and they're very accepting and everything like that. But it was something that throughout my whole school I was actively covering up. I knew it was there, but didn't want to accept it. So the specific difficult situations when you when you have to find a girl to go to, the equivalent of prom with, and when your brothers feel a little bit sorry for you that you haven't really had much of a dating life, so they start to connect you with other girls to go on dates with and things like that. That was always slightly difficult to be able to navigate, but it's one of those things that you realize in hindsight how much you actually did to be able to put up a cover and a wall. And would I have done anything differently? Probably not. I don't regret anything throughout that period, but nonetheless, it's always that like cumbersome thing you have to keep going through year after year after year. Given that's kind of what we teach kids to do. So now that's probably the most difficult thing. Other than that, as I said, super.
That's challenging, man. That's a big one. That's a deep big one.
Yeah, it plays into so much of what I ended up doing actually in my career and how I go about doing that. But I forget about it sometimes every now and then when someone pops up on social media that that I haven't spoken to in 10 years. I sit there and I'm just like, they don't know yet.
Oh, wow.
I've never broadcast it out, and I've never been that public about it. So it's but outside of that, yes, super awesome family. They're all still back in Australia now. Both of my brothers have married and had kids. So I'm Uncle Pat to 5 nieces and nephews now. Which, being on the other side of the world, doesn't make it particularly easy on that front. But I feel like every time I see them, they look and act differently. But yeah, super awesome family. Still very close with them. They're very accepting of who I am. It just have to go through 20 hours of flying to see them these days.
Well, that's awesome. Hey, thank you for sharing that, man. That was really good. So what did you want to be when you grew up when you were a child? What was your dream career?
It's still the same thing that I want to be now, but I still haven't gotten off my ass and done it. So I always wanted to be a paramedic. That was my
really?
that was my thing. And it was all throughout school, and there was this weird kind of like misalignment thing because in school I was always getting super high grades, and I was in a school where teachers were talking about going on to doing your training in law and your training in dentistry and your training in mathematics and all this kind of stuff, and so I never actually did anything with it, but I never lost that desire to become a paramedic, and I still get that. I think a lot of feeling that kids get when they see like police officers and firefighters and paramedics, and you see the sirens go past, it still gives you that, like, I don't know what it is, just like sense of what an awesome group of people to be able to do that. So always wanted to do it. Again, one day might find the courage to go back and throw the people towel and do something different. Yeah, for whatever reason, my desire to become a paramedic ended up resulting in me enrolling in law school. So, I don't know how that happens, but that was kind of how it went.
So it's actually kind of ironically, 2 of my best friends, like my best friends in the world, are or were paramedics at certain points in their life, and we do a lot of big mountain backpacking stuff together. Like they're like my best friends, and it's awesome that they were paramedics. Like, it is so awesome.
Pretty helpful skill set to have.
I'm always hurting myself.
Yeah.
Things are always happening, and it is just so refreshing to have people like that around. And it's an awesome thing for even just paramedics generally and what they do and how they give back in their everyday. And it is not an easy job by any means. So that's awesome, man. It's never too late. Right?
Never too late. I'm looking into it at the moment now that I've moved to Austin around, even if there's some ways to, contact EMS and do some volunteering or something like that.
Yeah, that's one of my buddies. That's what he did for years.
Yeah.
Volunteer, firefighter, paramedic. Yeah. Did that for a lot of years. And the stuff you see is pretty crazy too. A lot of crazy stories. But
it's wild. It's wild. So no, send me a message in 6 or 12 months time and get angry with me that I haven't followed through on this. It'll be like my own little accountability thing to get it done.
So let's dig a little more into your high school land. What kind of music were you into? What was your first car? What did that look like? And then what was your first job?
Music, first car, first job. So my music has never changed. I have one band that I've been in love with since I started listening with them. I still go to all their concerts. I am unfortunately, I'm a Coldplay fanatic.
Oh wow, love Coldplay.
Yeah, so awesome. Been big into them for maybe early 2000s or so. I think I've been to probably 7 or 8 of their concerts now. If you've never been to a Coldplay concert, it's one of the most surreal experiences you can ever experience, like ever see in your life. Although I was at Taylor Swift recently, and that might just happen to trump a Coldplay concert in terms of just things that you never thought you would experience in your life. But always been huge into Coldplay. For whatever reason, Spotify still knows that I love them. It pops up on every hit list. It's in my final, that little ranking that Spotify gives you at the end of the year. It's just full of Coldplay. So I've never been able to shake that, which, is pretty cool. And then first car is, I bought my mum's car when I was in high school. She wouldn't give it to me. I had to empty out my savings account at the time and buy it. I think it was some principle of working for people in finance, that you get nothing free, you can buy it off me. But in hindsight, I knew I got it for a pretty good bargain, so thanks mum and dad. But ended up driving a Subaru Impreza. I went to a school that was probably close to an hour and a half away. I had a big walk, and then I had a bus, and then I had a train, and then I had another walk. And I think over time, and starting to spend more time in studies and stuff, I think they realized that a car would help me cut that journey in half at least. So one of the first kids in my grade to get a car, which is the worst thing that can possibly happen, because everyone's trying to hitch a ride at the end of the day, and you got to be that nasty person.
I feel that's a good thing.
I don't know. It depends when they live. If they're on the way, it's okay. But
how where you were.
There's a few people in a similar neighborhood, and I'd always be in the car with them. But there were folks I'd have to go the opposite direction with. I was I appreciate you as a friend, but not that much. Maybe once a week. It's a Friday special or something. And then I had that car for a very long time until I ended up, once I came through college, I found myself working out in the coal mines in Australia, which at that point I thought it's probably time to trade in the old Subaru Impreza for something that can handle the odd dirt road a little bit better.
Right, so what was the first job?
First job I had, there's something really deep and introspective around how I ended up in HR after this first job. But I worked for a video rental company, basically the Australian equivalent of Blockbuster, and absolutely loved it. I think I loved it though because it used to share a space with Subway, which meant all day all I could smell was Subway cookies, which is just unreal and just lingers on your clothes. And I did that for about 3 months before my parents found out that I wasn't actually being paid for it. There kept being all these excuses. You should have been paying me a weekly. Well, I was doing 20 hours a week or something. And
you were working for free?
Yeah, it was. I kept accepting the excuse. At this point, I remember my parents saying, when you turn 14 years and 9 months in Australia, you are eligible to get a job. And you can have paid employment. And when, literally 14 years and 9 months to the day, and my parents were get out there, print out your CV, go and knock on the shops and get yourself a job, and ended up getting one, and just kept having the excuse from the owner of the business, which was there must be a problem with the bank, or still trying to work this out, or give me your details again. I was he'll sort it out. He seems like a nice guy. And I never told anybody about that. And it wasn't until I was 3 months in where my dad was just I think it was something to do with the tax time stuff. And he was can you give me a copy of all your pay slips? And I was I don't have any of the stubs or anything. And he lost it. And I think he realized he was the adult in that situation. So he realized what was happening a lot more than what I did. And I ended up having to have my first proper HR experience where I was you've got 3 days to pay me or I quit and take legal action and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up getting my money in. Yeah, I ended up getting my money straight after that letter, and I quit anyway, which was disappointing because it's a really cool job working at a video store. I mean, I love Netflix and Prime and all that. It makes it so easy, but there are fewer things I miss from an activity than being able to go into a video store and just go crawling through the aisles of videos and DVDs and see what you can find.
Dude, I miss that shit. Yeah. I hate Netflix and Prime and Hulu, all of it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, of course we all love it, but it's kind of a lie. But I tell you what, it's what happened to the Friday or Saturday night when you would go out as a family or out on a date, let's go let's go pick out a movie, and you would watch shit that was terrible, but you watched the whole damn thing because that's all you had, and you know what, it was still all right, now there's so many options. I watched something that's probably amazing compared to what the shit was back in the day. But I'm like, man, this is boring. Next thing, it's just, I don't know, man.
I miss the
not
old
the same.
like 5 for 5 deals. You go to a video store thinking, "Hey, this just came out. Terminator 2 just came out. Terminator 3 at that point just came out. I'm gonna rent this. It's gonna be great." Then you turn up and they've got like 5 for $5 Tuesday special on like 90s horror flicks.
Right.
Like I'm gonna go get 5 of the worst horror movies ever because I can't turn down this deal, and I'm gonna watch them, be up till like 3 a.m. and hopefully go and return them the next day. We don't have that stuff. Kids these days growing up aren't going to get to experience that. It's a shame.
My older brother, I have one older brother, 6 years older, and his best friend, his mom owned a video store in Laguna Beach where I grew up. And so like as kid, that's like all they did. Would they just like sit there and just watch movie after movie after movie and then work in the shop and like, talk to all the people coming in. I mean, it was cool, man. I mean, everybody kind of knew the people at the local video store, right? Or it was, where I lived, there wasn't, we didn't have Blockbusters because Laguna's kind of weird about big brands coming in growing up. But like as I moved around and went to, all went to Blockbuster or whatever. But I swear, it's like, can we get that back? I don't think it's ever coming back.
I don't think it's ever
never coming back.
It's going to be one of those weird things that like it'll make a resurgence, like record players and stuff.
We'll have this, totally.
We'll have this like fancy thing. People are going to think they're going to be these like 19-year-olds who go into vintage stores and start thinking it's really cool hiring out like Blu-ray DVDs and videos and stuff like that. And it'll be like a collector's item gathering dust again. But when that does happen and you get the old store that starts to specialize in that, they're going to be, for anyone between the age of like 30 and 70, they're going to be like a hoot.
Dude, I remember when I was young, I got a DVD player with like 10 DVDs and I was the coolest dude there was. Like, I was like rich. I'm got, 12-year-old fuck you money, right? Like, I mean, I was older than that, but like, I mean, that was the shit. And like, I'm like, what? You watch like the same movie 100 times on, and just so different.
It's so different. And it's going to, I'm looking for this at the moment, but I used to have this like super competitive video game thing with both of my brothers when Nintendo 64 first came out. And we were heavy into that. And like there were basketball games and like GoldenEye was out. It's like a first 007 game.
Dude, that was the best.
And super cool. And I've watched YouTube clips like in the last few weeks where you can actually see people's gameplay. And it's like, you don't realize just how bad it was. It was great for the time, but you look at it now and you're like, there's like 8 pixels on the screen. You have no idea what's going on. But I went onto a site and I thought, I wonder if I can like get, someone wants to like flog an old Nintendo 64 and I can pick one up and, it might still work again. And I went onto some of these sites and there were like used Nintendo 64s with no games for like $700.
What?
I was like,
holy moly.
Did I make a mistake throwing this out 20 years ago? Like, should
I? Dude.
So maybe, I don't know, something's going to happen. We're going to end up in this, this like 90s phase of entertainment. It's going to make a resurgence at some point. I think it's going to make a lot of people happy.
That was all like 100% my generation. Like I was there, dude, Atari, Nintendo, Game Boy, Super Nintendo, all of it. Like, and it was so good. PlayStation, when PlayStation 1 came out, like that was the best, like Ridge Racer, all that stuff. Like it was so cool, and it's different. Like I still play video games a little bit, but not, I try to. It's like, all right, it's shitty out. I got nothing going on. I'm going to hang out and like play some video games. But like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know if I don't have the attention span for it anymore, or just like I have so much going on that I just feel guilty not doing anything for an extended period of time. I think that's probably what it is. It's like the anxiety starts to build, right? Like FML, like, I mean, I can't even enjoy video games anymore. But that's crazy.
Easier way back. Video games are one of those like terrible things that it's difficult to get in, but once you're in, it's kind of difficult to get out then.
Yeah.
So you almost need to like, I don't know, lock yourself in a basement for a day and see if you can like force yourself to get back into a game.
Do you play in the new system, like PS5 or any of that stuff? No.
Not a lot. Yeah. I've moved around so much at the moment that I've ended up with this like patchwork of video game systems that are just sitting in boxes gathering dust. And I will at some point, but I think similar to you, life happens, things keep getting in the way. I keep thinking of some, lame excuse as to why I can't, find the time to go and do that. But one day, there's a long list from this recording about things that are going to go, I'm going to do one day. But no, I'm going to find a cheaper. I need to go to like I don't know, half price old store somewhere and get a few of the old systems and see if I can get it working again.
That's crazy. That blows my mind. I would not expect that. All right. So the video store didn't get paid.
Yep.
Sent the legal child notice that says you better pay me or I'm going to sue you with my big attorney or whatever it was.
Yep.
They paid you and you're like, okay, great. So then what happened?
Yeah. So then it was probably the start from that point in high school through to when I finished college. I was the stock stacker at the supermarket. It was unexciting, but very, very helpful work in some respects, because often night shifts played in well with kind of the lifestyle, often gaps on weekends and stuff. I didn't have much of a social life anyway. I was too busy writing my equations on the whiteboard to have too many friends for a social life. And I did that for quite some period. It wasn't until I ended up starting college that I actually started working full-time at the same time as doing full-time college, which I don't know if that was stupid in hindsight or not. I definitely didn't get the same college experience that a lot of people had, where they built up those networks and they're in sports teams and all this kind of stuff. I would either do like daytime shifts and then skip classes and try and play catch up without getting in trouble, or I'd do nighttime shifts and try and sneak in a few hours, at 6 a.m. in the morning to get some sleep before class. So I came through just a whole stack of different like part-time supermarket gigs. Basically, I was just trying to make money, not for any specific purpose. I was just that like greedy teenager who started to see money in his bank account and said, I want more. And did that for a period. It probably wasn't until I became a tennis coach that I started to be like, hey, this is actually work that's fun. And, not going to suck the life out of me from spending, 40 hours a week in the back of a warehouse of a supermarket.
So what did you go to college for?
So I started in law school and then I dropped out after 6 months because I hated law school classes. I don't know what it was about like the way people were speaking or the chest beating stuff or my attention span. Something within that whole kind of system of study just didn't work for me. And before then, it was kind of funny because my dad was trying to line me up with work experience at his work to go and work with their chief HR officer. And I was just like, don't be stupid. There's no way I'm going to end up in HR. I don't like people. And I thought I'm going to go to law school. I don't know if that's any better, but I'm going to go to law school and do that. So I moved up to Brisbane, was living with my brother at the time. This was when I started working full time at the same time as doing, full-time classes, and just hated law school. It's just like epic moment where you realize you've been doing all these like study and exams to get this like score and a grade to get into university. And then you get into university and you hate it. And I did the usual thing at that point, which is like what most people do in their kind of 30s and 40s. And I'm like going to throw it all in and do something really crazy. And I remember doing an application for paramedic science. It's the closest I've ever gotten to actually being able to pursue that. And I don't even know why I ended up withdrawing it, but I ended up moving back down to Sydney, moving back in with my parents, working again as a tennis coach and studying HR. But I swapped the city university for like a coastal university, super cool, like laid back place. And I just started studying like management, HR, and like a bit of marketing stuff as well. With no real view at that point as to where it would go. I was just getting good grades and it seemed to be fairly easy to kind of get through it. And I thought I'll keep running with this until I see where it goes. And you have this moment then when I think towards the end of your college where you're like, okay, well, I've just spent a ridiculous amount of money, debt, to be able to get this college degree, which should be a very helpful degree to be able to get a job, but I have no idea what to do. And once again, in hindsight, my dad knew the answer and was trying to get me there in a different way. He's like, you should go into a company like BHP, which is where I first joined. It's like Australia's largest mining company. And I think it's one of the world's biggest ones, but certainly it's one of Australia's largest companies. And he said, go through a graduate program, do your HR training, it'll set up your career. Once you've got something like that under your belt, like, people want to always be hiring you.
Yeah.
And did that. Took a few failed attempts through like recruitment schemes and stuff, but ended up joining a graduate program. And to give you a sense of just how poor my social life was at the time, I had my final exam in my undergrad on the 27th of November. And my 21st birthday was the day after. And BHP called me like a week before and they said, could you start early? Could you start on the 28th? So I went from final exam. Most people take 3 months off, big summer break, go and enjoy yourself for a little bit, catch up with friends, do some travel. But I went from final exam one day to my 21st birthday, starting my first day in a corporate HR gig with a mining company. Go figure. But chance to make a bit more money, get into the work. Didn't have much of a social life, so I thought I'll give that a crack. And been working the grind ever since.
Nice. All right. So then, okay, the mining company, you were there for a while.
Yep.
Tell us a little about that. I mean, that's got to be pretty gnarly, like HR within that type of a business. There's all kinds of stuff because there's so many, I don't even know how you say it. Like, I don't want to say different departments, but just like so much they do, from people in the mines to running the equipment to the clerical to the, executive. Like, I mean, and those companies are massive, massive, massive. So what was that like?
The scale of the operations, it's so difficult to be able to even articulate or picture just how big these operations and this setup actually is. So I started in the Brisbane office and then did like a series of rotations, and they put you in kind of different operations to kind of broaden your experience. So I did one stint within an underground coal mine, which was a ramp mine, not a shaft mine. So I never had to take the old movie elevator shaft down. But you did have to sit on, like, it's called a drift runner, basically like a mining equivalent of a Batmobile, to be able to drive down a ramp for 45 minutes if you wanted to see anyone. And mostly 11, 12-hour shifts on a mine site. Frontline supervisors don't really want to have anything to do with you because you're HR and you've done nothing for them. And you're in this situation where you're forced to build credibility and trust and try and take any opportunity you can to help somebody have a better experience at work, help them sort out a problem that they've got, help them, study a different trade, move into a different role. You're looking for those like super micro opportunities to build trust, because none of it's there when you start. And underground is one of those really interesting cultures where most people who work there are second, third, fourth generational miners.
Oh, wow.
So you'll often get the folks who, I say parents, but it's almost always, very, very few women on an underground coal mine site. But it will often be that, you've got a guy there who might be a maintenance worker, and his son is coming through an apprenticeship scheme, and his dad is working at the end of his career, and his granddad used to work for the company. And for a lot of those towns in those very remote communities, it's a, what do you call it? It's almost like a weight on that town that a mining community comes in, because you've got all these like ridiculously highly paid people all taking up all the housing, all the school spots, funded by, these huge multinational companies who are stepping in. For a lot of those mine sites, a lot of the workers, the people who would be there, are those who come from those towns. They've learned their trades and then they go out to work in the mines. And I really appreciated having that experience to do that, because, first mine site was about 600 people, but the second one I went to was the real eye opener. So top of the mine to the bottom of the mine was about 18 miles.
Holy shit!
Which kind of
18 miles, like in the ground.
Yeah, it's not one big pit. So it'd be like a series of pits. But if you were to go from like the top of the northernmost pit to the bottom of the southernmost pit that makes up that one operation, one mine site, it's 18 miles.
Jesus.
And you're talking here about, a mine site that might have, you see the big like Tonka trucks that exist, where you see like people
massive.
I stand up next to it and I don't even get to like the edge of the tire. Like the rim of the tire is taller than I am. And you've got like 100.
Coal? What were they mining?
It's all coal.
Okay,
yeah. Doing my bit for the planet, clearly. And that mine site, you'd have 100 of these trucks. It would have diggers, excavators, huge amounts of maintenance crew. All the coal goes through processing plants, gets on trains and goes out to the port. And that mine site alone had almost 3,000 people.
Wow.
So the scale of this, I've worked in companies the last, the last 6 years, where the entire company is smaller than like the number of chemical engineers on one plant, on one site.
Wow.
So the scale of these operations is absolutely huge. It's a really, really like heavy HR environment. So you've got years of deeply entrenched mistrust. You've got very, very active unions who've done a lot for the teams, but often a fairly kind of confrontational approach between a lot of HR teams and unions. Not always, but in some cases. And a mine site where things like health and safety don't come as a given. It's like one of the
lot of comp claims, I assume. Lot going on around that.
Yeah, lots of comp claims. It's been one of my biggest challenges stepping into the tech industry, where you sometimes get, hopefully no one from too many of my teams ever listens to this, but you sometimes get the the person who's really struggling because they don't have a chair that's comfortable enough for them, and claiming about how it's like fundamentally impacting every part of their life. And I know in my heart that I will empathize with that and fix it for them and so forth. But when you come out of a mine site environment where my first couple of weeks in an underground mine, a chap was stuck in between two bits of equipment and it crushed his leg and he can't walk. And one mine site that I was on where we had a death happen while I was on site. And when you see those kind of things happen, it's really difficult to then shift out of that industry and empathize with something that, I had to kind of relearn a lot of that stuff. So it's a really brutal environment that is, I have full respect for the people who are out there, sometimes for their entire careers. They're putting themselves in harm's way. Most of the teams are trying to do it the safest possible way, because sometimes people don't come home from their day at work, and everyone is there for their families, and I respect that. It's an awesome thing to be able to do. So I did that for almost 6 years.
Wow. All in Australia.
All in Australia. Yep. So all in like a central part of Queensland, about halfway up Queensland, about 3 or 4 hour drive inland. That's kind of where. These are some of the like biggest, richest coal mines in the world, and they're all clustered in one like basin within a part of Australia.
Wow. So then what made you leave the coal, the mining industry, and then what was kind of the next thing in your career?
I ended up quitting HR first. So I got sick of the role of HR. I was on layoffs crews and doing restructures, and it just kind of it took its toll on me. And I had the opportunity by he was like a supply chain VP. He was looking for like a chief of staff to kind of help him set up a new function. And he was everything from like procurement, category management, purchasing, warehousing, inventory, that kind of supply chain side of the mine site operation. And he knew I was frustrated in HR, and he kind of offered me a chance to step on to, first real kind of leadership team, his chief of staff, basically become his right hand. It was like the first moment where I was just like, I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. Like, I'm literally in a role that I'm absolutely not qualified for. I've got it because of relationships. I need to make the most out of this. And it was great fun. I really enjoyed, one of the most enjoyable roles I've had in my career was not in HR. I don't know what that says either. And I was in that for a period, and it was a realization I had, I think, in my life, which was, I wanted to travel. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to one day found and build a company. I wanted to do all those things. And, mining is great if you want 30 or 40 years there. But I was at the point where I'd seen a lot, done a lot, ready to kind of throw it in. So in the space of a week, I think, quit the job, ended my lease, sold my car, booked a one-way flight to London, and figured, I'll work out the rest when I get there. Wow.
So then what?
Yeah. So then landed in the UK and ended up in a utilities company. Really, really testing experience working in that sort of company.
Why London? Like, why there?
Australian visas. So it's one of those weird ones where I wouldn't actively pursue the British climate, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
It's not something that I really gravitate towards, but the UK is one of the countries that Australia, along with like New Zealand, I think even Canada, has got these like working visas set up for. Basically, it's really easy application process. You can do a 2-year stint. I didn't know if it was permanent or not at that time. So I thought I'll take a working visa option. I'll do 2 years in London. I'll work it all out. And if it means that I'm working in HR, that's fine. If it means I'm working at a pub, I'm cool with that too.
Yeah, totally. Nice.
And I kind of play that. I thought I'd do a bit of travel around. I did some studies in Vienna during my university days, and I thought I need to see more of Europe. So I thought tick, tick, tick. Whether this plays well into my career path, I don't know, because I've never really planned anything in my career. It's all just kind of happened. But at the very least, it's ticking so many personal boxes. It feels like it's a wasted opportunity to not do it. Turned up in London, had a bit of a failed stint with a utilities company, mostly because I was back in that zone of doing the HR work that I knew wasn't adding any value to a business, and it was just the stuff I don't get out of bed for, excited about on a Monday morning. And I went to go quit HR again. I feel like my career is a series of temper tantrums I've had about HR and and landed elsewhere. It definitely gets better. We're just in this weird, like, tumultuous phase until I worked out what I like doing. And ended up evaluating 2 opportunities. I had 2 chances and kind of 2 offers. And one of them was to step back into mining in like commodity economics. So working in like this financial analytical role. I'd done my like master's in applied finance by that point and stuff, and I was kind of interested in pursuing that commercial path, and had a connection set up from an old colleague. Kind of met their team. They were based in London, still working back within BHP, but very, very different role. And I thought, hey, this kind of sounds cool. And then I met a founder of a startup, and this is ultimately the path that I took. But I met the founder of a startup named Andrew. In 2016, 2017. And we had coffee in a little coffee shop in Shoreditch in East London. And it was supposed to be like a screening call to hire a people ops manager, I think first HR person within this financial technology startup he was building. And supposed to be a screening call. And you have these conversations sometimes where I think we both realized about 20 or 30 minutes into this screening call that this was going to be really, really good. And we were clicking, and it went way over time. We started solving lots of problems, and this is the first stage interview. And ended up taking that opportunity. So I went from 50,000 person mining company to 2,000 person utilities company to a 30 person fully bootstrapped anti-VC financial technology company that no one's heard of, based in East London.
Wow.
And that was my first. So startup number 1. I'm on startup number 5 now, but that was startup number 1. And first HR hire. They'd done some cool stuff already. Like, they were pretty having a founder who, like, you didn't really need to convince too much around the importance of people and culture and doing good in the world. Like, he was sold into that. So there was some good stuff already in place. But this was a company that was 28, 30 people based in the UK, and then over the next 5 years, we built it up to be 8 countries across the globe, 100 and something customers. Kind of really, really cool expansion story, and profitable, bootstrapped, kept its roots, which I totally appreciate. And then my roles there started as that first people ops hire, became the head of people based out of New York, got to kind of come over to the US for a bit, and then as our kind of some of the structure, and we had a growth equity partner come on board, do a bit of a secondary with us. And when they came on board, I then came back to the UK and took on the COO role with the banner of, what you've built in the people team, can you now go build it across a few other areas?
Wow. COO. So you moved up. Wow. That's amazing. That's really
cool journey. Just like such an awesome opportunity to be part of a journey like that. And the business is like, probably still to date the best business I've ever had the chance to work in. But it was a business that truly, like, you talk about like, values on the wall and big, bold missions, and, we care about people. This was a business that was just, and still is just hell bent on doing right by the world and by its people, and has this long track record now of showing that through action, not just words. So to be part of that, the chance to work with that founder, build that leadership team out, build my team out, and show that, hey, you can become a B Corp, you can reduce your environmental footprint, you can do things like diversity and inclusion in a way that isn't this like toxic political thing that gets thrown around on Twitter, and you can actually build an incredibly successful, revenue generating, profitable business at the same time. It kind of goes against the chord of a lot of the other stuff that's on LinkedIn at the moment. So that was just super, super cool.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
So COO, so then what happened?
That was so startup number one. Kind of finished that state at COO. Had a conversation at that point with Andrew, which was, if I'm going to build the sort of almost like not quite portfolio career at that point, but I was ready to go see a different startup journey. I had conversations with a few founders. My only experience of being in any startup was a profitable, bootstrapped, small, lean, financial technology company that was a B Corp, and that's just not representative of what the startup world is for good or bad reasons.
Very rare.
I now fully appreciate that much more than what I did at the time. And I've kind of moved between a few different startups then. So always been heavy in the B2B SaaS game. I like that. It's becoming my jam by accident, but I still enjoy it. But I've gone through from financial technology to cybersecurity to ed tech, and I now sit on their board, and now to Insurtech with Send. Always been typically that first people or operational hire. Sometimes it's been wearing the HR hat. Sometimes there's been a few other hats. Early days of a scrappy startup, the job description's never written, and that's fine. But almost always with the remit, which is we're going to grow. We've got nothing in place from a people perspective. We know if we get this wrong, we're screwed. If we get this right, it's going to be really awesome. Can you help us get it right?
Yeah. What's interesting is back in the day when I started Tech Canary, startup that I had, I read a book, Behind the Cloud, written by Mark Benioff, who started Salesforce. Yep. And it was just about the Salesforce story or whatever. And whatever, say what you want about Salesforce and whatever. Salesforce fucking rocket ship. And so I was a Salesforce partner. So anyways, so this book, really good. What I found was most interesting is at the time was his bigger hire, his first big hire was an HR leader. And at the time, I've been an entrepreneur. I've owned businesses and whatnot. And I was like, what? Why does that make sense? And then when you think about building a business for success for the future, especially when you're a startup and you don't have a lot of people, you really need someone that can come in and find and recruit the right people first and foremost. And then it's, build and then maintain that culture that ultimately creates something really, really special, that is, unheard of in my, and so that always stuck with me. And I've said that, I probably even said this before on this podcast, I was kind of at the time, I'm like, holy shit, that's in a way duh, but you don't think that way. It's I'm going to go hire the best developer, right? Or the best CFO, or I don't fucking know. I'm making it up, right? Great CTO, great product, great this kind of stuff, but HR. And it's but if you think about it, and this is for all the startup people that are listening to this, if you think about that, you need the person to go and hire those good people, to go and find them. Yeah. And it's a skill. Not everybody is good at that. They're not. You can be in HR and you are not a really amazing recruiter, if you will. And not to say you can't hire recruitment firms and there's all of that, but certain people have a real knack for looking under rocks and finding those gems, if you will, of people. And especially when you're a scrappy ass startup like I was, bootstrap and whatnot, dude, you don't have a lot of cash. So you got to get creative with what you got, especially when you're bootstrapping, And so it's how can I find people at a lower price point that are going to be absolute rock stars in the future? Yeah.
And it's probably the only startup I've joined where I think Andrew, the founder, was thinking ahead. Most of the startups I've come in is usually because something's broken already.
Oh, I could totally see it. Shit, this is too much. I gotta get somebody to handle this. I can't. Yeah.
And that is still
service I've been using.
Totally. And it's and that is still fun. I'll admit. I respect the founder who wants to put bootstrapped small amount of profit into a people ops hire when there are only 30 people. It's a very early stage to be able to do that. And this was part recruitment, part people, part a few other things. Every other startup, even Send where I'm in now, there have been things that have fundamentally led to the hire being late. And they've gotten along with agencies, with outsourced kind of contracted HR firms, with managers being kind of let to do what they need to do. And you play this kind of like spaghetti unwinding when you join. Fundapps was never quite that, because he was ahead of the curve. And even when I joined, like, you would not expect to join a 30-person startup, and there's a recognition system in place. There's a salary review spreadsheet with some very basic but free benchmarking in place. There was an ATS running their recruitment. Like, they had a system behind their recruitment. It wasn't just, spreadsheets and emails and, hiring old mate who I used to work with 10 years ago. It wasn't that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So they had all this stuff in place because I think they got it, especially Andrew. He knew early on that ultimately his role was going to become people and customers.
Yeah.
And he never stopped recruiting. Even when I was in that role, he was the best recruiter the company had. His eye for who was going to make a great person in the startup was always way sharper than what mine could have been. But we partnered on that stuff, and then we built that infrastructure around it. And what became a recruitment engine. At one point, I think we were recruiting with like a near 100% offer acceptance ratio. Our time to hire was like 22 days from when we'd spec out a role to when somebody would sign a contract.
That's amazing.
And we could only pay median rates. We had no bonus system. We had the makings of baby equity. We had okay benefits, but we built and told the story of a culture and a journey, and did it in the most no bullshit, authentic way we possibly could. And that stuck with candidates, and they all wanted to be part of that startup that was, anti-growing too quickly, anti-doing harm by the environment. That seemed to really stick with it with a lot of people. So there's, no one's ever going to write a book on like a Fundapps growth journey, or many of those bootstrapped companies who go through it, because they're often the not sexy examples, but they're probably the case studies that universities should use to show what entrepreneurship looks like, because it's tough. I don't envy any. I mean, you've done it too, but I don't envy any founder in the early couple of years of a bootstrap startup, and the trade-offs and that you have to make behind where your money goes is insane.
Oh, it sucks. One of my buddies not that long ago got involved in this financial technology startup. New founder, starting this thing, great tech, good guy, pedigree, whatnot, but big corporate his whole life, right? So I go out, I fly out to Florida. My buddy's like, hey, can you come and just meet this dude? I want you to see what you think, whatever. So I go out to dinner with this guy because, hey, we had great dinner, and he's like, hey, can you come back to my house and let's have a drink? I'd love to let you meet my wife. Right. So we go back to his house, have a couple cocktails, and we start getting into it. And he's never started a business before. And so I say to his wife, like, at a certain point in the night, we develop a relationship. I don't just come out swinging with this kind of stuff, but I'm like, you better be ready for the next couple of years. It is not going to be the same, and it is going to be extremely stressful. And in order for this to be successful, he's going to be working like a fucking dog, because you have to. I mean, it's not the same. It's not 9 to 5. It's I'm sorry. In those first few years, I mean, it depends on if you go raise a gigantic pile of cash and whatnot, and you got the next 5 years to play around with it, and that's a different situation. But this wasn't that. This was like second mortgage on the home kind of thing. Is how we're gonna do it. And I'm getting my buddy was like basically doing it just for the equity, and not even getting the salary, but to build a business like that. And I think to your point, like, it was funny because I don't think that she was shocked, and I wasn't being like hardcore about it. But I think when I left, they still, and him too, weren't ready for what's to come.
Yeah.
Now speed that up a couple years later, complete shit show.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, really, really hard. Still going, and they've become successful, but it's been a real journey, and it's so taxing on your family, your loved ones, everybody around you. I personally, it's my hat goes off to the startups that are doing it still, because is really, really tough. But I want to go to something though. What's interesting is that there's a lot of people that try to manufacture what you're talking about, right? Like in my early days, I spent a lot of time down in Market Street, San Francisco, and it was like, and it was kind of funny. Somebody made a comment to me the other day. It's kind of like when tech startups were complete madness. Like they were doing all kinds of dumb shit. Whatever. There was all kinds of stories, but a lot of them that I spent time with, they were, oh hey, but we have beers here. We get free beers, and they got like a cereal bar and like all this shit. But they work us like dogs. The executive team, they all suck. They're not nice people. They're not doing the right thing. But the mission statement on the wall and the core values say that we're like this. And when I got hired here, they like took me around. It seemed like it was so cool, but benefits are terrible. The pay is not that great. I work like a dog, and I don't really feel appreciated. I feel like just a number here, And so like, there's a lot of that, and a lot of people try to manufacture this kind of culture, and they still do today.
Yeah.
And so what do you think it is, Pat? Like, you've lived it, you've been a part of it. You are that guy that creates these good cultures. That's why you've been successful in your career. And even when you said when you're at the mining company originally, you loved helping people. Like you want to give them that satisfaction, And so like, what's the difference? What do you think the difference is?
I think there is a pocket of people who've they've solved a part of the culture equation, and another pocket of people who refuse to believe it's even part of the equation. Kind of what I mean by that is that culture is not the thing that eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is not the values on the wall. It's not how you feel on what's the thing that's on LinkedIn at the moment? How you feel on a Sunday night before you go to work on a Monday. All of that's this like really, really fluffy way to try and like simplify culture, because it is inherently really, really complex to think about what culture is. But culture ultimately, if you strip it down to still complex, but a simpler form, is how things happen in the business. And it might be how decisions are made, how people communicate with each other. Are people flipping their chairs around, talking to each other when there's a problem, or are they pointing fingers? What happens when things get really, really tough? What happens when someone does a kick-ass job? Do they get a founder giving them a tap on the shoulder saying like, hey, that was just some of the best work I've ever seen. You should be really proud of yourself. Like all of that stuff is starting to give you an extra flavor of what the culture actually is. So once you know that culture is not this like pie in the sky on the horizon kind of thing, culture exists in your business from the day you start the business. And if you're a one-person founder, the culture is you. How you operate is the culture. And as you grow the team out, there will be things as a founder that you want to keep consistent within the business, how decisions are made, how people communicate, the mindset of people, and especially when it comes to things like customers and employees. And there will be things that you naturally want to let evolve within the business, because the culture of a 10-person eat a pizza around a scrappy startup is very different to a 1,000-person company. And I think the people who've solved this part of the equation have realized that you have to be very, very deliberate and specific with the culture that you're trying to keep. The things that you believe are the core. People keep calling like the special sauce and the jam and things like that. But people like Andrew at FundApps, this was one of the things I wasn't particularly additive to this, right? I just kind of played off the back of some of his stuff with this. Is that he was always super, super specific around the things that were non-negotiables around how the company ran. So it came to something like you stick one of FundApp's values is be transparent. And it sits on the values board of probably 30 or 40% of companies these days.
Yeah, right.
It's pretty common. And it's always a great thing if you're in a recruitment process with a company that's transparent to be able to say, hey, can you give me 3 examples from the last week around where, someone in the business has been transparent about something that's not great? And the companies that get it right can do that straight away. Like they'll know that. The companies that don't, where it's just fluff, they'll struggle with that. If you take something like transparency, it existed since the early days from Andrew and how he operates. And it existed. It was one of the things he was very, very clear with me. As the business grew, as we hired people in, as we expanded globally, as we became a different company, the non-negotiable was the transparency. Like that ink can't ever come off the page. It has to always be there. And it became ingrained into everything. And this is the culture piece. It was the here's something that's core to our success and will continue to be, and here's how we're going to ingrain it in absolutely everything. So if you were to join FundApps today and come on board as something, you could jump straight into their knowledge base and you could see every single customer, where they're based, all their terms and conditions, how much they pay us, how much they've done, everything throughout their history, all of their success scores. You will see every engagement survey data. You'll see gender pay gap. You'll see financial results. You'll see absolutely everything from day one as a new employee, even as a grad coming into FundApps.
Wow.
That exists in probably 1% of companies.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's like, I don't know how I feel about that, actually. To be honest with you. I'm like thinking through that. I'm like, I don't know. I guess I could see it, but I got to get into the
I think if you went from 0 to 100 in one go, it would be quite shocking. But this is a business that's been around for 15 years, and this has been incrementally growing over time.
Totally. Yeah.
You can open up a page and it will show you how every salary is benchmarked, and the sources that are used and the compensation philosophy. You can jump onto their awesome. You can jump onto their job ads, and they will have a pay range, and usually something very specific around like what they're looking for and what they're not. Mm-hmm. So what separates this company from, other than obviously a founder driving this, but I think what separates this for the people who truly get culture is they've been deliberate in defining first what they're looking for in their culture and what they're trying to create, and then embedding it in absolutely everything. The thing where I think companies get stuck, and I've been guilty of this too, is that culture needs to be everything to everyone. And you're starting to create an environment where everyone can be happy, where it morphs and changes. And that's ultimately like the best growth journeys and cultures in the world. I think Salesforce, I've never worked there and don't know a huge amount for them, but I'd take a pretty educated guess this is the same. They've probably got a pretty specific, deliberate way of working and operating, and Mark would have been huge in how that established, and there'll be some things that just never changed at Salesforce throughout their journey. So that piece around culture, defining the specifics, not being afraid to, because culture is just as much about ruling out the wrong people as it is about getting the right people in.
Totally.
And being able to do that, and then actually embedding it day to day. That is, for me, almost all of the equation of getting culture and values right. I think I've been in startups where you never feel like you've nailed it, to be honest. You always kind of feel like it's need of improvement and imperfect and things are broken. When you're in the weeds of it, it's easy to spot the flaws. But when I think on some of these startups in hindsight, the effect that has on the quality of hire, the engagement of the team, the stickiness, it's still the only startup where they've got a significant portion of their early team still in the business. And some of them have been there for 8, 10, 12 years.
Wow.
And that I think speaks volumes.
But I think what I'm hearing though, Pat, is a lot of it is like top down. It's like the founder, it's like that founding team, maybe, right? The CEO kind of sets that and they're like, this is how we are. But I'll tell you, man, like I've met people over the years that that didn't even own businesses, but maybe like we're going to start a business. And there's been a couple times in my life where people have come up to me and they've literally said like, that power must be really nice, like must feel great, like in kind of in a bad way, right? Like to be able to control those people in that, and like God, it's got to feel good to have that kind of power, and I'm like, the first time somebody said that to me, I was like, I never even thought of that. Like what are you talking about? You know what I'm saying? Like I don't think that way. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is sometimes you have people like that start businesses that can create a very different culture and business because of the way that they are, right? So my question is, could that be transformed with the same founder and same team that's there? Like if I hired you and I was a complete asshole,
Mm-hmm.
would you come and help my culture become better? I mean, maybe you'd like fire me, but like, you know, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. It's kind of, it's just, you know, I'm kind of debating this in my head as we're talking through it. It's like, because a lot of it is like, you hear this thing all the time. It's top down. And I've seen it. I've worked with companies like, man, those guys are a bunch of fucking assholes, you know, excuse my language. But you know, like, and then you go and meet like the team, like the people that you're working with day to day, and then you go and meet the leadership, and you're like, no wonder, you know, how often is, you know, it happens so much. And so like the company that you're talking about, and Andrew seems like an awesome, amazing human that wants to do the right thing for his people. And that's like, I could tell, like, that's a this is my family type of leader, right? Like, you know, and that's everybody, humans being family, really. And so not everybody's like that.
No.
Right. And then especially as you go from, maybe that sometimes they even are like that. But then you get, and that was a bootstrap startup, which is very different because you have control in some way, more control over your culture in that way. Then you bring in VCs and PE and all this. Then now all of a sudden, you can't make the same decisions that you were able to before. Now, I could argue that as a leader, you're still the leader and you can still, you know, call the shots. But it's interesting. Like, can you take a shitty leader and still have a great culture? I guess is the question.
Let me be bold and say yes, depending on a few criteria. So I think the first one is if I remember going through a recruitment process and I met the founder and was very, very underwhelmed, and then eventually met somebody else within the team who said, you know, the founders openly said that if you were to come on board for this role, your job is basically to keep them out of jail. It's as much a symbol of having, you know, somebody in who can help, you know, make sure nothing terrible goes wrong for the company, rather than actually the opportunity to do good.
Right.
And there's a part of me that says, could I be optimistic and say that company has a chance to be able to, you know, for that founder to grow through that and so forth? I think I'd be way too pessimistic to think that anyone is incapable of growing out of a certain behavior or a mindset or whatnot.
Fair enough.
I do think that keeping in with your language, assholes attract assholes. So I do think there is a hole you can dig where it's no longer just about the founder.
Yeah,
so if they've built a company that starts to exist in their shadow and starts to replicate some of those behaviors, it could even be difficult at that point. We've seen this with some of the like notorious tech companies who they've outed a senior person, but then it's actually been really difficult to culturally transform that business because so many of those behaviors become ingrained. So I think on a really individual, personal level, I think everyone is capable of learning and growing and so forth. Some people do it quicker than others. Even, you know, I've sit here and painted a super like unicorn view of what Andrew is like as a founder. Andrew will be the first to tell you that, you know, there are things in his leadership that, you know, he struggled with or is not particularly good at, and he kind of recognizes some of that. So I think criteria number one for me is there enough self-awareness from the founder to realize if they know they're being, you know, behaving in a certain way or doing things in a certain way, maybe they've had success from it. Maybe their behaviors are driven by other insecurities. So to avoid having to be X, they overcompensate on Y. And it's super common in a lot of leadership roles. So I think I'd like to know, is there enough self-awareness there that, you know, they'd be open to things evolving over time? You know, this isn't just a 360 process and you get better, but it is going to need to be a little bit of, if I was coming into the business, you're going to have to be comfortable with me holding up a mirror sometimes and saying, you know, Reid, that was a really terrible thing to do, and here's a different way of doing it. And you absolutely cannot do that again. And, you know, feels like a punch to the gut, but that's probably what you might need. It's that kind of thing. I believe there's a journey for. Where it gets difficult is the behaviors that are entrenched within the business and how much of that you can start to unwind. And then the strange third piece is a super selfish angle. I get out of bed to have an impact. And if my impact is deferred by 6 or 7 years because I've got to try and, you know, probably help somebody who probably should have sort of, you know, see a therapist 10 years ago and work on some of this stuff, if I have to do that and I've got to wait 10 years before I can feel like I have an impact, I'm not sure I want to get out of bed for that kind of journey.
True.
So there's a weird piece here, which is everything I believe is recoverable, but I think the ultimate autonomy that each person should have, ideally in a slightly better economic market, is that, you know, to buy in and choose the sort of work environments and leaders that they want to work with. And if that selection were to fully happen, I think the businesses that start to piece together culture, start to piece together leadership and focus on it will start to attract the fair share of really strong people. And the folks who've been operating in their way for a certain point won't ever attract anyone that doesn't operate in that same way.
Right. So
it's a trade. It's a trade-off piece. The one thing I've always appreciated, I think, by every founder is I've never met a founder that's truly poorly intentioned. Even some of the ones I've done, like some advisory bits or different like little coaching sessions or just had a beer with sometimes. I've never actually ever met a founder where if you dig enough, that there's not at least some awareness that, hey, I've probably made some mistakes. I do want this to be better. I'm not willing to flex on certain things, and that gives me confidence that we're not just, you know, in the middle of a generation of especially tech founders who, you know, we shouldn't be idolizing. I think behind them are humans who have a lot of very kind of complex traits and psychologies they're working through. And, you know, that should be part of my job to help them ultimately be.
Do you think, though, that that's a founder thing, or is that like founder specifically, or like, you know, or like hired guns as well? Because I think a founder is a bit different, where it's like, I have this thing and I'm doing this thing and I need the people to help me figure this out. Where there's hired guns, you know, and they've done the Silver Spoon, the Ivy League, the whole thing, and they, you know, the world, some people owes them the right because they have done, you know, they checked off all the boxes and, you know, I mean, different in that way.
I think it applies to, for whatever reason, we forget in businesses that, you know, every single person, myself included, is an imperfect human. And we learn so many of our behaviors and traits over time because we're either incentivized or scared of doing either the same or the opposite thing. So I've worked with some folks who've certainly had pretty, you know, I'd say a conflict of values or a different way of viewing people or a different way of viewing businesses and so forth. And I don't have to, and I shouldn't ever have to agree with somebody to try and help them see a different way. And it's always my obligation to, you know, you talk about having power in that role. I've had somebody also say it must be like, you must feel really powerful to like be in the position that you're in. Like you can see everyone's salaries. You basically approve any dismissal and all that kind of stuff. I was like, I don't know if I see that as a power as much as I see it sometimes as a burden and a weight. And sometimes I see it as kind of a duty. You can look at it a few different ways, but the hired guns still are, you know, despite some sometimes toxic behaviors, some sense of entitlement, some really weird entrenched things. The further you dig in, you usually get a sense of a very complex human who has learnt that behavior or has developed that behavior as a product of their environment and their actions in the past. Some people won't want to change. I accept that. Some people do want to change. I'm really excited to work with that. And anything in the middle is kind of acceptable too. So it's a kind of a long-winded way of basically saying I don't think it applies just to founders, but I think the founder mindset is like super special and unique.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it. So let's talk a little bit about your book, man. So you wrote a book. Like how did this all go down? You know,
did I tell you about the book? I feel like I haven't told you about the book. Someone told you about the book. So I published a book at the end of last year called People Ops, and it was as much for my benefit as it was really for anyone else's. But I'm an avid writer. I don't usually write for other people, but I enjoy the process of writing. And for years and years and years, I've kept mixtures of notepads, mini journals, Notion pages, my Apple Notes on my my computer right now has got a whole bunch of juicy goodness in there. And I've always written down things as I've come across them. Some of them are pretty unfiltered and some of them are kind of note to self, don't do that again. And it's been kind of one of the things I talk quite openly about in a lot of the companies I work in is that pretty much all of my roles I've had, I've been learning by doing. I don't do particularly well within classrooms. I don't read a lot of books myself. I've got a very short attention span. I've got this weird wall sometimes that goes up when somebody tells me what to do. And so much of my learning has been from doing things, which means it's been a mixture of stuff that has gone well and stuff that I've failed miserably at. But I've written down a lot of that stuff as I've gone. And across all the startups has been this kind of like, asterisk point, lesson, nugget, equation for something I haven't worked out yet, problem I can't solve. And I ended up writing this blog post on LinkedIn like 4 years ago or 5 years ago maybe. And I basically said, here's 10 things they don't teach you in school about what it's like to be in a startup. And it went bonkers on LinkedIn. And everyone started to get really into it because it was just this like unspoken truth around how like people are super messy. And, it was therapy for me writing that and publishing it. And then eventually during the pandemic, I gave up the sourdough starters and started to trade that in for writing proposals to book publishers. And I thought maybe, I don't know if this was some weird sense of ego or entitlement or something, but I think I needed a project. And I wrote to like 10 book publishers. I did these proposals and I wrote them all out and I sent them all off and then nobody came back to me. And I thought, yeah, that's probably the way it goes. And then in the space of a short period of time, publishers then started coming back wanting to chat about it. And eventually I landed on one publisher who said that there's something not in this space yet. So many of the books around people and culture and startups are frameworks for how you can think about things, research into certain things, all very high level stuff. There wasn't a lot in the market that was, hey, I've gone and done this. This worked. This didn't. I tried it again. It still didn't work. Here's what I'm still learning about it. And that's what the book was. The book is a collection of 100 and something or other lessons, notes, journal items that I wrote to myself around things that were working and not working within a startup. Or more importantly, things that I wish if I had the chance to do them again, I would do them very, very differently. So it's quite introspective. It pulls no punches, although the publisher pulled a few of the punches out because they were inappropriate for general publishing, apparently. And I think the words they used was some of these stories are too triggering for a general market. But it leaves in there a lot of the stories behind what it's actually like trying to build a people and culture function, what it's like working with founders, and just a load of stuff I got wrong along the way and wish I could do it differently. And it seems to have gone down pretty well so far.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Send. So this is your first Insurtech company. Is that right?
Yep.
So tell the audience about Send. What does Send do?
Yeah, for sure. So first insurance company, but still within that B2B SaaS thing that I've kind of been pegging myself in for some time. So we're an Insurtech that was born out of the London market about 7 years ago. We operate globally now, but we came out of London. We've got a core product called Underwriting Workbench, which is really designed to automate and streamline all of the administrative, painful, analytical, repetitive work that underwriters have on their plate, often things that are highly manual, rekeying amounts of information, getting different systems to talk to each other. And we try and bring all that together with the goal of how many hours a week can we free up for underwriters to focus on the higher value work, the portfolio management, the relationship, focus on, quality, all that kind of stuff. So we cover everything from submission to bind. We can ingest huge amounts of data from third-party services. We can build custom workflows, tasks. We can standardize journeys. We can automate some of it so that underwriters' time and attention only goes to some of the more complex activities. Everything from pricing, building in ratings, some automated workflows around that, compliance checks. It's designed to be that guide by the side that exists in many other industries already to be able to help free up time. But for whatever reason, underwriters have been a little bit unloved for a bit too long. And we're there to solve that. So 7 years into the journey, we are, to put some perspective around the kind of the curve we're on, we've grown from about 30 to 100 in the last 2 years. And it's that beautiful, beautiful stage of a growth curve where we find ourselves keep having to grow for the demand for how many companies now want to invest in their underwriters. They're looking at how tooling can help them be better at their job. They're looking at how they can be more efficient. And we're kind of there to say, hey, we can be your partner to make this happen for you.
Underwriter workbenches are super hot right now. They have been for a bit. The carriers are getting after this because there's a lot of operational efficiency that can be
Yep.
saved there
Yep.
with this. And I didn't realize until not that long ago how manual and that process is across these, very large tier ones all the way down, all of them,
Yeah.
carriers. And it's just having that single pane of glass for everything to come together that allows the underwriter to access the data, the things they need. What does this look like? What's the propensity to win this? I mean, there's so much. What does this agency look like? What's been our win percentage with this agency? None of that really exists. I mean, it does through guys like you that are building it, but it's spreadsheets and phone calls and forms and relationships. A lot of it today, and there's so many tools and there's so much, especially with Gen AI and everything that's out there that can really, really help them be smarter about these submissions and really streamline that. And so it's a big space. And there's not a lot of players like Send that are really focusing on just that. There's like Uncorked and like these guys, like they're like focused on a million things, but their product may work well for that, in ways. But that's your guys' jam, which is really cool.
Yeah,
Very,
and
very cool.
It's why we've tried to keep the focus there. We've got we've got 3 founders at Send, and a huge chunk of our team who've all come out of the industry and seen firsthand what it is like to be an underwriter. And we speak with underwriters every day. We're learning of these pain points. We know that there's too much work. There's an aging population. There's a huge amount of retirement risk coming up. There's talk of AI and how it can augment their roles, and ultimately we exist to try and be the glue between a lot of that stuff. So we can take all of that, like we're highly composable in how we're set up. So we do a lot of work individually with each customer to make sure they're getting as much value they can out of our platform. But our goal is that that amount of time that underwriters can divert to the higher value activities is so critical for these organizations and so critical to their growth and success too. And also just for the sanity of underwriters who are just bogged down in so much, as you said, the spreadsheets, the duplicate kind of workflows, the systems that don't talk to each other. And so we plonk Send straight in the middle of that. And over time, we will start to expand that horizontally and start to look at even more of the process. But we know we solve underwriting pain points. We're targeting just on that at the moment. And as I said, it's that really beautiful phase where we're not growing because someone threw us a whole bunch of money and said grow. We're growing because we just keep getting more and more companies that are saying, hey, we don't know what our solution looks like yet, but we think we need to talk to you, and kind of working through what that looks like for them.
So are you guys, is it mostly there's got to be a big part of what you guys do is professional services. There's got to be a bunch of job shop work, because there has to be. I mean, you have the platform, and then because it's so bespoke at every one of these carriers. That's their underwriters, and what happens there, that's their secret sauce. Yeah, a lot of them would argue, and so it's got to be a lot of work working with them to really figure that out.
And the one thing we've always been really clear on is that we're not just the platform that, and we don't believe that our customers want this. We're not just the platform that you're going to buy off the shelf and hook in. We want to work with you to make sure that it's set up for your workflows, your journeys, it's running in the right way. So from a professional services angle, for some of our customers, we've done that professional services work ourselves. We've got an entire team of folks who are solely dedicated to making sure that all of our customers can kind of get the most value, but also start to think about what's next, new lines of business, new regions, and so forth. And then more recently, we've started partnering. As we've started to talk to different organizations, we've started partnering just for more capacity. So we've got Deloitte, Accenture, Solas, a bunch of different partners who are all kind of coming on board now, who interestingly are echoing exactly what you said. This is the talk of the industry. There's more and more demand for it. They're looking for solutions that they can use. We're looking for their expertise to kind of support that from a professional services angle. So we're kind of we're made for each other at the moment, which is helping.
Yeah, I think if you ask the agencies out there, I think generally they would say, oh, they think just the underwriters are slow because they're just like slow people or something.
Yeah.
But they don't realize that the systems aren't connected. Like
No.
they don't even know. Like I was just having this conversation with BCG, Boston Consulting Group, the other day. They were telling me all about this. They're deep in the weeds, a lot of these carriers on this stuff. And they were saying like, they don't even know, a lot of them, that they quoted this a year ago, or that this this is already a customer of theirs, but they're quoting another line of business. It's crazy. It's like everything's so disconnected. And to be fair, these carriers may have 14 different instances of policy administration systems that are not connected. And so it's like going in there and building that single pane of glass and then connecting all this stuff together. It's a journey. It's a big journey. And that's what I was going to ask you. You have to partner with the SIs like Accenture, Deloitte, McKinsey, all these guys, like, so that they can kind of, you're selling in the platform, and maybe you're doing some customization on that, but then you're enabling them to go and build all of that stuff and spend the next 5 years of their lives figuring that out piece by piece. And each piece is important as they connect it together, but it's a big journey to get there.
We'll be on that. We've seen this within a few different kind of related industries, like cybersecurity and banking have gone through this, where we anticipate starting in underwriting, but we know that if we do that really, really well, the demand is going to be there for Send, for a workbench to start to exist outside of underwriting and to be that fabric across a broader kind of piece of that workflow. And that's going to be quite exciting for us. We're not in a rush to do that. We want to build this company in the right way. But we've already had quite a few different conversations with customers who they're not just looking at underwriting, but how we're approaching the underwriting workbench is influencing then how they're thinking about different parts of their business. And I ran this example actually with because given I haven't come out of insurance, but I've come out of other industries that I think are probably not as kind of lagged behind insurance in terms of their technology adoption. The cybersecurity space is one of the most crowded SaaS vendor spaces at the moment. Oh, yeah. It's exciting for a number of reasons, but a CISO in a tech company, even a large one, can have at their disposal like a single dashboard that plugs into 80 different tools that can tell them immediately their policy compliance, the updates from penetration testing, their 3 or 4 different kind of data services providing them live analytics. They could plug into a monitoring system that will tell them if somebody shared a credit card detail on Slack and they shouldn't have. And they can get that level of visibility in one single source of truth. Imagine what an underwriter could do with that.
Yeah, right?
And that's the piece where we've seen the need for it. Aviva came on board as customer number 1 for us a number of years ago, which was like one of those true kind of validations that we're hitting on something here, which is clearly a pain point for businesses, makes underwriters' lives easier, and we just have to do it in a way that is really aligned to where our businesses want to go, and keeps it simple and effective. So that's kind of where we're playing.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. All right, a few more questions. We're running out of time. All right, you ready for this one?
Yep.
What do you do for fun these days?
Lots these days. So as of 7 hours time, I will be, my partner and I will be adopting our first dog. So that's going to take our...
Oh, wow.
We've been at a rescue shelter earlier this week and we've adopted a dog. So as of tomorrow, my answer will be a significant amount of time with my little furry member of the family, probably getting her settled. Outside of that, probably a few things that keep me interested outside of work. I still have an interest in all things sports, even though I don't play as much. So I still wake up at stupid hours sometimes to be able to watch Australian rugby from Fridays to Sundays. So I start early anyway, but 2 a.m. on a Saturday to watch teams play rugby, I'm down for that. So my early mornings of my weekends are almost entirely dedicated to watching Australian sports, which I don't know if that's sad or passionate, but I like it and I've been doing it forever. So it's keen traveler, ticked off about for 45 countries now, I think. Kind of working my way.
Oh, no kidding. That's badass.
Working my way through quite a bit. Got a few treks on the horizon, so trying to get back into this. I did a number of years ago. I did Everest Base Camp, which was just one of the most awesome trekking opportunities. Also had 2 paramedics on my group. So as I was sitting there smiling with that story before, I get that I hurt my knee, and they were first to tell me to stop complaining, and then and then it wasn't that bad. But did Everest Base Camp, absolutely loved it. Loved the Himalayas, loved the journey of it. Want to get into more doing that. So I was going to do it this year, but probably next year now I'm going to try and do Mont Blanc. It's getting back into a bit more trekking and hiking, which is good fun. So yeah, sports, hiking, antique shopping, looking for weird and wonderful things for the house that you've never seen before, and you're not sure if anyone would ever want that in the house, but you get it anyway because it's only $5, that kind of stuff. So it keeps me occupied. It's not really giving you a super exciting list of hobbies here, but it's I'm at least at the point in my life now, which I wasn't maybe 10 years ago, where work is not my life. So it's
awesome, man.
Yeah.
You know, it goes to show, like, you as a person, as just kind of like a happy-go-lucky, good dude. Like, you know, so many people, like, you'll say, like, what do you do for fun? And it's like, they don't really have answers, you know? And I think they're not being fair to themselves, you know? I mean, you got to love yourself, and you got to love life, and you got to have fun, man.
Totally.
You know, regardless of what that is. And I'll tell you, sometimes, and people will say it, look, I technically have 5 kids, you know, and I'll tell you what, like, family, I love family. I love my kids, all of that. But that's not what I do for fun all the time. Yeah. Right. And a lot of people will say that, like, oh, I got kids, but they're in the grind. They're grinding it out. Yep. And you got to find time to do that stuff. Now, you're about to have a kid, you know,
a fluffy kid.
You know? But you know what I'm saying? And so, I mean, it's powerful. And you're doing, you know, big things. I mean, all the trekking stuff and all of that. I mean, it's so good just to clear your mind.
I had a coach once a number of years ago who, there's some psychological framework around this, but the short version is, he said, if you were to lose your job and somebody asked you who you are and what you do, what would you say? Because too often we'll say, oh, hey, like, I'm Pat. I work at Sen doing HR stuff, and I do some education stuff on the side, and da-da-da. And if you lose that part of your identity, what else is there in your identity to give you fulfillment and purpose? And for whatever reason, that stuck with me for like the last 10 years now, which is, your work is not your identity. As passionate as you can be about it, like, keep the passion, keep the fire, work hard, put in the hours, get the results. But it doesn't need to be everything. So I wouldn't say I'm perfect on that front, but I'm a hell of a lot better than what I was probably 10 years ago with, you know, I've got a big, healthy life outside of work, so that if startups don't work out, I'm still going to be waking up with a great deal of meaning in the morning.
Yeah, I think everybody needs that, right? Because it radiates within your professional life, you know? And so, all right, a couple more questions. Yep. How do you give back?
Oh, great one. It's a deep question. So it's probably changed based on where I've lived. So between the UK and the US, I think I've moved about 10 times in the last 10 years, which makes me like the worst volunteer for volunteer organizations. I must apologize to quite a few of them. But it's kind of varied. So I know the first time I was in New York, I was actively involved in everything NYC cares. So out doing gardening projects. I remember meeting with people who had been formerly incarcerated, looking for their first job, and needed to know how to do a job interview, how to talk about their incarceration, how to write a CV, trying to do stuff that way. It's always been quite like micro things that, if I can add value to something, it's worth it. Then I went back to London. I found a different purpose, which kind of opened up the board role with the educational stuff that I'm doing at the moment, which was working more closely with schools around their curriculums and how they think about setting people up for work life and things like that. Because there's this huge disconnect between, you know, how schools are like, what schools are like, and what work life is like. So doing a lot of like careers training, working with local colleges and stuff, they're always in need of help to be able to do that stuff, and they never know who to reach out to. And there's quite a few like intermediaries on that space. And then my goal now genuinely is to try and get back into something more related to paramedicine. So I I haven't done anything on that front yet. Again, accountability, stick it on the list. But finding those organizations local to Austin who sometimes they need a set of hands or donations or whatever it needs to be, and try and pick it up that way. So it's been fairly kind of ad hoc, but it's usually been if there's something. I've probably defaulted to, like, as a good rule that actually Andrew at Fund Apps used to have, is you don't care about something unless you put your time or your money behind it. And I've always quite liked that. But I think most of the giving back, I've probably steered away from donations, rightly or wrongly, and probably put more of my time towards it. And probably continue to keep doing the same.
That's awesome, man. Last question. What's your favorite drink? What's your drink of choice?
So when I was, you can see if you want to edit this out or not. When I was in the mines, we would drink for fun, for nothing else to do, because you're living in a mining camp. So we'd have 20 or 30 people living in these crappy old demountables, and they put your food on, and you had a wet mess, and you go and pay $1 for a beer. But I got into rum then, but I got into not good rum. I got into really filthy, dirty Australian rum, $4 a bottle rum. And I wasn't even drinking it with good stuff. It was rum and store-bought home brand cola, that kind of stuff. But it stuck for years and years and years, and I never grew out of liking this. So my favorite bottle is the worst. Any Aussie listening to this is gonna hate me for saying this, but it's called Bundaberg rum, which is the most generic. I don't know what the US equivalent is, but the most generic, dirty, bad rum that exists in Australia. I have grown out of that a little bit and now started to develop a taste for nicer rums. This hopefully shouldn't make me sound like an alcoholic. I don't know if other people say, "Oh, I really like kombucha" or something.
Well, hell no.
But no, for whatever reason, I've struggled with wines. I don't drink a lot of beer. I'm not huge into whiskeys and spirits and cocktails and all that kind of stuff. But for whatever reason, for 15 odd years, I've had an eye and a tongue for rum and never grown out of it. What's yours?
So rum and coke.
Rum and
coke's your
or
jam.
just rum.
Just rum.
Or just
straight
rum.
up.
It can be. What about you?
It depends on what it is, but I think my favorite cocktail overall is just a really good gin dirty martini. Is what I like. Just regular olives up, extra cold.
Yep.
A little bit bougie. I just think a good dirty martini done right is just that's a great. But I like beer too. As I'm getting older though, dude, it just doesn't I just can't do it. I'm it just makes me feel like shit. And so it's, so I don't know, but I mean, really right now over the last couple of years, people that know me, they'll know the drink that I usually always order now is a margarita. I love margaritas, man.
Yeah.
I love margaritas. If I go to a shit dive bar, my drink of choice is a Jack and Coke.
Oh, yeah.
Because and then with a lime, who can mess that up? It's a great drink. It's easy to do. So Jack, Coke, lime, shit dive bar, nice restaurant.
Yeah.
I'll do a good martini.
Yeah.
And then generally I love a margarita.
Yeah.
And then dude, there's nothing like having a cold beer on a nice summer day. Nice IPA or something, but not too many of those. And honestly, I used to drink a lot, but I've really cut back on a lot of that. I don't really drink at home or drink alone anymore. And I used to drink way more than what was probably healthy. But it just I don't know, man. I just kind of gotten away from it a bit. I had buddies over here last night and we were working in the garage on a bunch of stuff and they were drinking beers. Nah, I'm good, dude. It's just and that's not really who I have been for a long, long time, but kind of just growing away from it, I guess. Maybe it's a phase. I don't know.
I'm convinced that the UK has removed my love of beer because it's not served ice cold. So I'm very thankful to be back in the US because it does.
I could totally see that.
Yeah. It's just a thing, and I seem to be one of the only people that has a problem with it in that country. But for whatever reason, it just stopped me from ordering that pint of beer. And I'm also a cheap drunk, so I'm it's very easy for me to go out for drinks with folks because I have 2 drinks and I need to go home and go to bed.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, Pat, hey man, thanks again for doing this. This is really great. I really appreciate you, and keep doing what you're doing, man. Helping the people, doing the right thing. It's awesome, dude.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great fun. Really appreciate it.